Welcome to Empowered with Elizabeth Naumovski. Women are jugglers. We juggle careers, schedules, both personal and professional. We juggle our home life with families and our children. And today I'm speaking with Barbara Gray, who is a chartered financial analyst and is the owner and founder of Brady Capital Research Inc. Barbara went from having a corporate job to becoming an entrepreneur. And like many women during COVID, she homeschooled her two boys. And within 6 years, she has actually published 10 books. And now that is a lot of juggling. She also has some really interesting ways of looking at the world, and we will discuss with her today. So let's begin. Barbara, welcome to Empowered. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hey, thanks, Elizabeth. Happy to join you.
So, speaking about juggling, you were in Vancouver, and then you were in Montreal, and now you're in Toronto in a hotel room to be on the show. So a lot of juggling, and really difficult to get here on time today, too. So I really thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I wanted to talk to you about leaving a paid job. What made you, how did you decide to leave the corporate world back in 2010 and go out on your own and launch Brady Capital Research? What were the steps that made you do this?
Yeah. Well, the big thing was I decided to leave the corporate world in 2010. So I quit my job in February 2010. And with my then boyfriend, we threw everything into storage. He just moved in with me 6 months earlier. We got in my convertible and we set off for a 2.5-month road trip around the United States, which was awesome. And it's interesting because this was still during the recession. And then when I got back, I found out that I was pregnant with my son, who I called Brady. And so it was really, I struggled then when I was pregnant. I'm like, do I go back to doing a sell-side equity job, which is pretty brutal. I mean, when I worked in New York, from 2000 to 2002, the hours were 80 hours a week. It was pretty much boot camp. When I worked on Bay Street, I covered income trusts. And when I did that, I was working maybe 60, 70 hours a week. But I was working out of Vancouver. And in Vancouver, the markets were 3 hours behind the market. So I had to get up at 3:30 in the morning, be in the office at 4 o'clock. So I really had no life. So anyways, back to the road trip, it was really fun. And then I decided, I'm like, you know what? I want to try to do my own thing. And sort of the catalyst for me was my husband told me about this conference in Austin, Texas called South by Southwest. It was on in March. So we drove there, and it was fascinating because I was used to the corporate world of suits, of BlackBerries at the time. And I entered Austin, and then at that point, there were no financial people at the conference. It was mostly techie people. Everyone was wearing jeans, t-shirts. They had iPhones. It was weird. It was this new world that I really hadn't done it. And it was at that time that I found out about this sort of new exposing disruptive force called social media. Twitter was there, LinkedIn, Facebook. That was the early stage. And that gave me an idea for an investment thesis. And that's sort of what I used then to write a research report all throughout when I was pregnant in 2010. And then I published it independently at the end of 2010, talking about my new thesis. And it was supposed to be published in the new year, talking about juggling. And then my son came a month early. So I ended up publishing it before right after, soon after he was born.
So you had a lot of, some people would think, negative forces, and you actually took them all and put them in a mixing bowl and created something pretty incredible for yourself, where a lot of people wouldn't have wanted to do that and would have thought, oh, poor me, I'm going through that. I lost my job. I did this, I did that. But you took it and you ran with it. So kudos to you.
Thank you. I didn't lose my job. I quit my job.
Okay.
Usually I lose my job and I get a beautiful severance package. This time I actually quit my job and went off on my own.
So you are working in a male-dominated industry and, writing those research reports. There are so many of them out there. We have about 30 seconds before we go to break. How do you set yourself apart of all the other research reports out there? Like, what makes you special?
Yeah. So when I started Brady Capital Research, my focus was basically to do qualitative focus research. So not looking at the numbers so much. And I've really, the last 6 years, I've been focusing mainly on the tech stocks. And so what makes me different is that most analysts look in the rearview mirror and they look in silos. I look at what's going forwards.
Welcome back to Empowered with Elizabeth Naumovski. And right now, today's topic is juggling. And I'm talking to Barbara Gray, and we're talking about how she comes up with investment ideas. So how do you do that? Because it's such a competitive environment that you work in.
It is. So I think the advantage I have is that most analysts are left-brained. They're very analytical. I've got both sides of my brain going. I'm analytical. I'm left-brained because I did my CFA, obviously, but I'm also chartered financial analyst designation, but I'm also right-brained. And I think being female actually has a bit of an advantage in that. So if you look at the CFAs, when I did mine now over 20 years ago, only 15% were female. That's the same when I worked in the industry as an equity analyst. And for times, I was the only female equity analyst in the firm. So, females tend to be, I don't know, maybe a bit more emotional. And the way I differentiated myself, actually, even back in my income trust days, is I always did tied in thematic stories. I love reading books, especially business books, and I took a lot of the lessons from those and tied them into my research. And that's really how I've differentiated myself in the past and how I differentiate myself now.
Because the financial industry is so vast. So what is your secret to connecting the dots and actually connecting with the analysts that are going to be reading what you've written?
Yeah, the way you just do it every day. So my process is, so I think of myself, if you think about the Impressionist artist, George Seurat, he's the father of pointillism. And I sort of see myself as, not see myself, but as Seurat. So what he does is, he puts together the dots, and from that, the canvas emerges of a beautiful image. What I do is every day I look for the dots. So my main source is Twitter, and Twitter I follow Wall Street Journal, TechCrunch, Forbes, CNBC, basically every source as well as individuals. And from that, I find out what the latest disruptive themes are. And I have a process. I mean, every day I spend about 5 hours writing out the latest disruptive themes. I put out a weekly research note, and it's really all about it's connecting the dots, seeing things by putting things together. And because I have, over 20 years of experience in capital markets over a wide range of sectors, I can do that. You couldn't just go in and just starting writing up stories and, and connecting the dots and come up with investment thesis. That doesn't work. You have to have the background behind that. And then what I do is once a quarter, like now, I just put out a 28-page research report, which then I go and meet with my institutional and corporate clients. And I'm meeting with you tomorrow, Elizabeth, to talk about. And then from that process, what I do is every 8 months, because I write 1 week research note a week. It's usually between 5 to 10 pages. And I turn that now into a book. So every 9 months, I churn out a book. And it's really just a compilation of all my research notes.
And that's what I was just about to ask you. So you've published 10 books in 6 years. And I was going to say, how have you managed to publish so many books in such a short period of time?
Well, the first book I called Ubernomics, and I actually published that based on all the blogs I'd written. So from 2010 to 2016, I wasn't meeting with clients. I was just doing research for my own purposes and my own investing. And really, I also had 2 boys and, was trying to raise 2 boys during that time. It was in 2016 that I went back and met with all my former clients on the street and actually started selling my research. But so in 2016, before I went back to sort of the boardroom, I took all the research I'd done over the last 6 years, all the blog articles and stuff, and turned that into a book I called Ubernomics, The Economics of Abundance. And then it's interesting. So then I started writing my research and on a weekly basis in early 2017. And by the end of the year, I realized, I'm like, wow, I've written over 60,000 words. This could become a book. So I used the same platform that I'd used before. It's called Readsy, if anybody wants to do it. It's free. And I basically took all the articles, the research notes I'd written, and put them together, wrote an introduction, which was actually a good discipline forcing me to go through all the research I'd written over the last year and really synthesize it and come up with really the bigger themes of what was happening. And then I actually hired a cover designer, and I called the book Secrets of the Amazon, because starting in 2017, especially, I think it was March 2017, I found I was writing more and more about Amazon. Now, this is when Amazon stock was at $900.
So, Barbara, let me just stop you right there because I want to finish hearing about Amazon, but I also want to talk to you about the new book that you're writing right now. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Empowered with Elizabeth Naumovski. And before the break, we were talking to Barbara Gray, and you were speaking about a book that you'd written about Amazon.
Mm-hmm. So to continue the story, so I decided that it was, I could do this, and it was just before Christmas, and I thought, I can turn this into a book and give it as a gift to my corporate institutional clients. But it's an interesting story. So at the time, I didn't want to actually put it on Amazon I didn't want to sell it. I just wanted to give it as a gift. And I actually gave a print copy because that was before the pandemic. This was in Christmas of 2017. So what I did but I wanted to put on Amazon just to sort of see what it would look like and to be able to print it off of Amazon. So I decided to set it at Amazon stock price at the time, which I believe was around $1,200. So before it took off. And so that's what I priced it on at Amazon. So it was interesting.
That's a bit ridiculous.
A couple of people actually bought it. So it was
wow. Okay. Yeah. You're my new hero.
But they lowered the limit, so you can't price books that high anymore.
Now, let's talk about your upcoming book. It's called Into the Eye of the Storm. What does that mean right now?
So Into the Eye of the Storm, basically, I came up with this sort of thesis back in September. And, Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan, he warned back in June, there's storm clouds approaching. No, I'm going to change it. It's a hurricane. And so I sort of ran with that theme. And my thesis is, and this is, as we're doing this is near the end of 2022. So what's happening right now is that the Fed has been raising rates since March. And what's been happening is that this is sort of bringing these recessionary winds. So the eye of the storm is okay. So to talk about it, sort of the heat energy that's been fueling the hurricane storm is inflation. So inflation started to really take off after Russia invaded Ukraine. Now what's happening is you have to be careful though, because we are in the eye of the storm right now, because what's happening is inflation is dissipating, it's going down, and the Fed is moderating on its aggressiveness in raising rates. So we're sort of in a sweet spot, but you have to be careful because what's happening is the eye is above us. And this is sort of the calm interlude between the different phases of the hurricane. And we have to be careful of what's called the eye wall. So this is the rings around the eye. And what's happening is this carries all the recessionary winds that have been gaining strength since the Fed started raising rates in March. So this is what you have to be careful for, because you have to be careful of companies' earnings going down. So the book is titled Into the Eye of the Storm because, actually a client wrote about me 3 years ago. So back in July 2019, and he said, Barbara's like a storm watcher. Yeah. She watches for the storms because she puts together the dots and sees this. And he said, you might avoid the proverbial tornado. And that's really how I've been looking at myself since March, really watching the storm and telling my clients, like, watch out.
So this is it gets very complicated for people that aren't in finance. So how did you get started in finance, and what advice do you have for women wanting to enter the field?
Okay, so I did my Bachelor of Commerce degree at UBC, so quite a few years ago. And at that point, I got my first job by cold calling. This was before the internet. You had to use a telephone book, dating myself way back then to get a job. But what I realized is when I started working, I got a job as basically a gopher at Nesbitt Thompson, which is now BMO well, it was BMO Nez, but now it's just BMO, Bank of Montreal. And what I realized, though, is if I didn't want to be stuck being a secretary, I had to get my CFA designation, my Chartered Financial Analyst designation. So I went and did that. And then from there, I had to cold call again. I've cold called my whole career trying to get jobs. Even when I came back from New York and I was trying to get a job as an analyst, I had to cold call and set up meetings. So the one thing I would say is you have to be aggressive. You can't be timid. And the best thing to do is figure out what they keep saying you're passionate about, but figure out what you're good at and what you actually would want to do and not get paid for instance. And the other thing is you have to pay your dues. I mean, I worked in New York on Wall Street for 2 years. I worked 80 hours a week. I paid my dues. So now I can relax now, but now I can sort of do what I want to do and what plays to my strengths. But you really have to pay your dues, and I think that's something that millennials have forgotten about.
And we'll be right back with more of Barbara Gray. Welcome back to Empowered with Elizabeth Naumovski, where I'm speaking to Barbara Gray, who is an equity analyst at her own firm, Brady Capital. And Barbara, before we went to break, you were talking about calling, using the phone book back then. And there's a girlfriend of mine that I used to, that we talk about and we laugh. She said, when I worked in finance, I was smiling and dialing because that's what you guys did. And I guess that's what you still do.
I don't smile and dial anymore. I have a salesperson, so I do the research. I focus on my strengths.
That's perfect. Now, what I want to do is step back now, because I know that you were, we're talking about juggling, and you managed to juggle homeschooling with your boys for 1.5 years during the pandemic lockdown. How did you manage to do that? And what words of wisdom do you have for someone who, has to homeschool their kids, has a full-time job, and really doesn't have any help on the side and kind of needs some advice?
Yeah, well, it was a choice to homeschool my boys. In BC, they didn't mandate masks for the first year, and I saw the risks, and I wasn't willing to accept that. So, and my boys at the time, they were in grade 2 and grade 4, so it wasn't that difficult. My grade 4 essentially homeschooled himself. He was on the computer. He did his own things, and they really cut it back in BC to just math and language arts. And then my other son, who was in grade 2, I had to help him because he had just started learning how to read. So the way I did it is I worked in the mornings. I got up super early, worked in the mornings, and then in the afternoon, we'd cram it into 2 hours. And we did it in like 3 days. It wasn't a lot of work. It was basically like 80-20. If they gave him some silly things to do, we didn't do it. We just did the necessary stuff, and he's fine. And he just got his report card. He's in grade 4 now, and he's proficient at everything, and he loves school. So you just do what you have to do.
And you know what? Yeah, you do what you have to do. So what do you say to women who look at you juggling everything and thinking, wow, she can do it all, and I'm a failure? Because as women, we have that negative self-talk in our head, and it constantly brings us down. And, I love talking to successful women that are juggling, because they always have some words of wisdom that they can help others navigate through whatever negative stuff that they're going through.
Mm-hmm. Well, for younger women, I'd say, you can't have everything all at once. I waited until I was 40 to have my first child, my second child when I was 42. So, I I worked hard. I worked hard for the first part of my career, so then I could have sort of the luxury of starting my own research firm and being able to spend time with my kids. I mean, I guess that would be the thing, is you can't have it all. You just have to pick what's important to you at the time, and your priorities change too. I mean, when I was in my early 30s, I didn't even know if I wanted a family. It just happens, and you adapt.
So I'm a firm believer that, if you want to be successful, you should have a proper partner in your life, whether it's male, female, it doesn't matter, whatever pronoun it is. I've always felt that in order for me to succeed, I needed a life partner that can help me get forward to the next level.
Hmm. Definitely. I mean, I couldn't do what I've done without my husband. He's awesome.
So we have about a minute left. What words of wisdom would you say to anyone who is a mom or somebody who's actually thinking of leaving their career? How would you give them a little bit of a bright light to help them go to that next level?
Hmm. I think in terms of leaving your career, you have to pick the right time. You know, we might be heading into a recession right now. It might not be the best time to leave your career. Um, I think I don't know, you have to have a nest egg put aside because it is hard trying to do it. I mean, I basically started Brady Capital Research, but it wasn't until 6 years later that I actually started, earning revenue and actually having clients and stuff because you have to get things started. And even then it's a struggle. It's a way off. It's opportunity cost.
Thank you so much for being so honest with us today. Ladies, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we are jugglers without even knowing or wanting to be. It's what we do. But sometimes it really is too much. If you are overwhelmed, I'm here to tell you that it's okay to ask for help. Don't try to be the perfectionist because actually that person does not exist. And if you can't do it all today, that's okay. Write a list and add it to tomorrow's list. Let's deal one day at a time. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski, and I'm trying to empower you and make frugality fashionable. Thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.